welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden hues over Camelot's towering spires. Merlin stood at the edge of the castle's courtyard, his eyes narrowed against the fading light as a distant rumble echoed from the far reaches of Avalon. For days, a strange disturbance had gnawed at the edges of his consciousness, whispering of ancient power long forgotten. His hand instinctively clenched the staff at his side, feeling the pulse of magic that stirred deep within the earth. He knew something was awakening, as something older than Camelot, older than even the oldest legends. Arthur's voice broke through Merlin's thoughts. "You feel it too, don't you?" Merlin turned, his gaze meeting the king's. Arthur stood beside him, armored but casual, as if expecting trouble but uncertain of its source. Though young, Arthur's face carried the weight of his crown, the burden of a king sworn to protect his people. "I do," Merlin said softly. "It's ancient." "Powerful." "Another enemy?" Arthur asked, though his tone betrayed no fear. He'd faced enemies before, sorcerers, warlords, even Morgana herself. But Merlin shook his head. "Not an enemy. Not yet, at least. It's a broken bar, different. It's more like a calling." Merlin's eyes darkened. "And it's calling us." Arthur's brow furrowed. "Where?" Merlin closed his eyes, letting the magic course through him like a current. Visions flickered in his mind: dark forests, crumbling ruins, and a throne room long abandoned, the seat of kings and queens whose names had been lost to time. "An ancient kingdom," Merlin said at last. "Lost to history. But its power has awoken. We need to go, Arthur. We need to find it before someone else does." Arthur's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't ask who else could be searching, but Merlin knew that Arthur's thoughts turned to Morgana, as his did. She was always lurking, always plotting in the shadows. They both knew that if she caught wind of this power, she would stop at nothing to seize it. "I'll gather the knights," Arthur said, turning to go. Merlin stopped him with a hand on his arm. "No knights. This isn't a battle, Arthur. At least, not yet. We must go quietly, the two of us. The less attention we draw, the better." Arthur hesitated, his instincts as a king warring with Merlin's caution, but finally he nodded. "Just the two of us, then. When do we leave?" Merlin didn't hesitate. "Tonight." The mist clung to the ground like a living thing as they ventured deeper into the forest, its tendrils curling around their feet with every step. The horses moved slowly, their breaths misting in the cold air, as the path narrowed into a winding trail. Above them, the canopy of trees blotted out the sky, leaving only slivers of moonlight to guide their way. Arthur kept his sword close, though Merlin had assured him that steel would do little against what they were about to face. "What do you know of this kingdom?" Arthur asked, his voice low as though he feared waking the forest itself. Merlin's eyes remained fixed ahead. "Very little." It was said to be a place of great magic, ruled by sorcerer kings who wielded power beyond anything we know today. They hid their kingdom from the rest of the world, sealing it away with powerful enchantments when they feared their magic might fall into the wrong hands. Arthur frowned. "Why awaken now? What has changed?" "That's what worries me," Merlin admitted. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's powerful enough to break the seals they placed on their kingdom. And if that power falls into Morgana's hands, a broken bar." Arthur didn't need to hear the rest. The threat was clear enough. The trail led them deeper into the woods until they reached a clearing, where the mist seemed to grow thicker, swirling in unnatural patterns. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone archway, its surface etched with runes so old that even Merlin had trouble deciphering them. But he didn't need to understand the words to feel the magic emanating from the structure. "This is it," Merlin said quietly, dismounting from his horse. He stepped toward the archway, his staff held aloft, its tip glowing faintly as it resonated with the ancient magic. Arthur followed, sword drawn, as they approached the threshold of the lost kingdom. Without a word, Merlin raised his hand, and the runes on the archway flared to life, casting a blinding light that enveloped them both. Arthur felt the ground shift beneath him, as though the very fabric of the world was warping around them. For a moment, he feared they would be torn apart by the magic, but then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished, and they stood on the other side. Before them lay the lost kingdom. It was a desolate place, its once grand towers reduced to crumbling ruins, overtaken by vines and the passage of time. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and a cold wind blew through the streets, carrying with it whispers of the past. But beneath the decay, there was a lingering power, a pulse of magic that throned in the very stones of the kingdom. "This place," a broken bar Arthur began, but Merlin cut him off. "It's not what it seems. The power here is still alive." "Hidden, but alive." Arthur surveyed the ruins. "Where do we start?" Merlin's eyes glowed faintly as he reached out with his magic, feeling the currents of power that ran through the kingdom like veins in a body. "The relics are scattered," he said, "each one hidden in a different part of the kingdom, guarded by magic we can't even begin to comprehend. But we must find them before Morgana does." Arthur nodded. "Then let's not waste time." They moved quickly through the ruins, Merlin leading the way as his magic guided them. The first relic lay deep within the remains of the castle, a staff said to grant its wielder control over the minds of others. As they entered the throne room, Arthur could see the remnants of what must have once been a place of great power. The throne itself was shattered, its pieces strewn across the floor, but in its place stood an altar, and atop it, the staff. Merlin approached cautiously, his staff glowing brighter as he neared the relic. But before he could touch it, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and from the shadows emerged a figure, cloaked in black, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. "Morgana," Arthur growled, drawing his sword. Morgana smiled, her voice a silken whisper. "You didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did you, brother?" Merlin stepped forward, his staff crackling with magic. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Morgana. These relics aren't toys for your amusement." Morgana's smile widened. "Oh, I know exactly what they are, and with them, I will build a kingdom greater than Camelot ever was." Arthur lunged, but Morgana raised her hand, and a wall of magic threw him back, sending him crashing into the stone wall. Merlin raised his staff, unleashing a wave of energy that clashed with Morgana's magic in a brilliant display of power. The room shook as the two forces battled for dominance, but Merlin was weakening, and Morgana's laughter echoed through the chamber. "You can't stop me, Merlin," she taunted. "I am the true ruler of this kingdom now." But as Merlin struggled to hold her off, Arthur staggered to his feet, his sword glowing with a light that rivaled the magic in the room. With a mighty swing, he brought Excalibur down upon the staff, shattering it in Morgana's hand. A blinding light erupted from the broken staff, and Morgana screamed as the magic within it consumed her. In a flash, she was gone, leaving only the shattered remains of the relic behind. Merlin collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily as the magic in the room faded. Arthur knelt beside him, his hand on the sorcerer's shoulder. "Is it over?" Merlin shook his head. That was only the first relic. There are more, and Morgana won't stop until she has them all." Arthur nodded grimly. "Then we keep going." For days, Merlin and Arthur scoured the lost kingdom, uncovering relic after relic, each one more dangerous than the last. They faced countless challenges and magical traps, ancient guardians, and visions designed to test their resolve. But with each relic they claimed, they came closer to understanding the true nature of the kingdom's power. As they neared the final relic, the heart of the kingdom, Merlin's visions grew more vivid. He saw flashes of the kingdom's past, still once thriving civilization ruled by powerful sorcerers who had grown too greedy for their own magic. Arthur hesitated for a moment, but then nodded in agreement. "All right, Merlin." "Just the two of us, then." The next morning, the sun was barely a sliver on the horizon when Merlin and Arthur set out. They rode their horses through the dense forest, where shadows danced in the dim light and the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The path they followed was not marked on any map. It was a forgotten trail known only to those who had lived through the ages. As they traveled deeper into the forest, The familiar sounds of Camelot faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the trees and the occasional call of a distant bird. Merlin led the way, his staff glowing faintly as it sensed the proximity of the ancient magic. Arthur followed closely, his senses alert for any sign of danger. After hours of navigating through the twisted undergrowth, the forest began to open up. They emerged into a vast clearing, where the remnants of a once great civilization lay hidden beneath layers of vines and rubble. Towering stone pillars, half buried and overgrown with moss, hinted at the grandeur of the kingdom that had once thrived here. Merlin raised his staff, the magical energy pulsing in response to the power that lay buried within the ruins. "We're close," he said. "The relics are here, somewhere." Arthur dismounted, his eyes scanning the ruins with a mix of awe and determination. "Where do we start?" Merlin gestured towards a massive archway in the distance, its intricate carvings barely visible through the thick layer of grime. "There. If I'm not mistaken, that archway leads to what was once the heart of the kingdom. We should begin our search there." They made their way to the archway, pushing aside the overgrown foliage that had claimed the ancient stones. As they entered, the air grew cooler and heavier, thick with the weight of untold history. The archway opened into a grand hall, its ceiling supported by towering columns that reached up into darkness. The walls were adorned with faded tapestries depicting scenes of glory and conflict, a testament to the kingdom's once proud heritage. Merlin raised his staff, and its light illuminated the hall, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. "The relics are likely hidden within the inner sanctum," he said. "But first, we need to find the way." Arthur nodded and began inspecting the floor, his sharp eyes catching the slightest irregularities in the stonework. "Look for any signs of hidden passages or traps," he advised. "We don't want to stumble into any surprises." As they explored the hall, Merlin's gaze was drawn to a large, ornate door at the far end of the room. It was partially obscured by rubble, but the carvings on its surface hinted at something of great importance. With a determined effort, Merlin and Arthur cleared the debris and pushed the door open. Beyond the door lay a smaller chamber, its walls lined with shelves and alcoves, each holding a variety of ancient artifacts. Some were mundane old scrolls, broken pottery, but others were more intriguing. An ornate chest stood in the center of the room, its surface covered in intricate runes that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly glow. "This must be it," Merlin said, his voice reverent. "The heart of the kingdom's magic." Arthur approached the chest, his hand reaching for the latch. "Let's see what's inside." With a careful twist, Arthur opened the chest. Inside, they found a collection of relics, each one more remarkable than the last. A crystalline orb that seemed to contain a swirling galaxy, a set of ornate daggers that shimmered with an inner light, and a scroll sealed with an ancient wax emblem. Merlin picked up the orb, its surface cool and smooth against his fingers. "This is one of the relics," he said, his eyes widening. "It's said to contain the essence of the kingdom's magic." Arthur examined the daggers, their blades reflecting the dim light with an eerie glow. "These could be powerful weapons, or they might have another purpose." As they studied the relics, a sense of unease began to settle over them. Merlin's instincts were on high alert, sensing that they were not alone. His hand tightened around his staff, ready for whatever might come. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, followed by a familiar, cold voice. "I knew you wouldn't be able to resist." Morgana stepped into the room, her dark cloak flowing behind her. Her eyes were fixed on the relics, her expression a mix of greed and determination. "You're too late, Merlin. The power of this kingdom will be mine." Arthur moved to block her path, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Morgana, what are you doing here?" Morgana smiled, a cruel twist of her lips. "I've been following your progress, of course. And now that I'm here, I intend to take what's rightfully mine." Merlin stepped forward, his staff glowing brightly. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Morgana." These relics hold more power than you can imagine. They could bring about the end of everything. Morgana's gaze flicked to the relics, her eyes gleaming with malice. That's exactly what I intend to do. Camelot's time is over. With these relics, I will build a new kingdom, one that will surpass all others. Arthur's grip on his sword tightened. We won't let you do that. A tense silence filled the chamber as the three of them faced off. Morgana's magic began to flare, her hands crackling with dark energy. Merlin raised his staff, its light clashing with Morgana's dark magic in a brilliant display of power. The room was filled with the sounds of their confrontation: a magic crackling, metal clashing, and the shattering of ancient relics. Arthur fought valiantly, his sword moving with precision and strength, while Merlin channeled his magic to counter Morgana's attacks. Despite their best efforts, Morgana's power was overwhelming. She had come prepared, her dark magic fueled by a hunger for dominance that drove her forward. Merlin and Arthur struggled to hold their ground, knowing that if they failed, the relics and the power they contained would fall into Morgana's hands. Just as it seemed they might be overwhelmed, Merlin noticed a glimmer of hope. The crystalline orb, which had been lying on the floor, began to glow more brightly. He reached for it, sensing that it might be the key to turning the tide of the battle. With a surge of energy, Merlin lifted the orb high, its light casting a brilliant radiance that pushed back Morgana's dark magic. The room was filled with a blinding light, and Morgana's screams of frustration echoed as her magic faltered. Arthur seized the moment, charging at Morgana with renewed determination. His sword struck true, and Morgana was forced to retreat, her dark magic dissipating as she fled from the chamber. Breathing heavily, Merlin and Arthur surveyed the aftermath of the battle. The relics were safe for now, but the danger was far from over. Morgana would not give up easily, and they needed to uncover the full extent of the relics' power before she could make another attempt. As they gathered the relics and prepared to leave the Lost Kingdom, Merlin and Arthur exchanged a look of determination. They had faced many challenges before, but this was different. The power they had uncovered was immense, and the responsibility to protect it weighed heavily on their shoulders. The ancient kingdom had revealed its secrets, but the true test lay ahead. They knew that Morgana would not rest until she had claimed the relics for herself, and that their journey was far from over. With the relics in hand and a new resolve, Merlin and Arthur set out once more, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them and protect the legacy of the Lost Kingdom from those who would seek to misuse its power.